Hi, I'm Kedar, and today I'll be talking about something we use ever so often without applying the slightest thought in regards to the importance of it. It has taken the world by storm. That's right, emojis. Emojis are the most common form of pictorial representation and pictorial communication. So emojis are basically small ideograms used to communicate any action, word, or expression, and they are essential in virtual communication. So virtual communication is basically the transfer of speech through any form of technology that involves different social media platforms, text messages, informal emails, and also teleconferencing softwares. The usage of virtual communication has skyrocketed. Due to the pandemic, everybody needs to interact by using only virtual communication. Virtual communication is able to stimulate a face-to-face interaction and is able to make one person seem like that another person is right next to them. So why is virtual communication so important? Well, virtual communication creates geography history. It's able to eliminate geographical remoteness between two parties and also the time between two parties. You do not need to be in front of the other person to communicate with them. Hence, virtual communication was a revelation. A famous playwright named George Bernard Shaw once said, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has to take place." So you may ask, since human interaction is so important and since virtual communication plays an essential part in human interaction, how did people in the past communicate without any source of language or without any form of virtual communication? Well, back then they had something known as hieroglyphics. So hieroglyphics was an idea popularized by the ancient Egyptians that involved three subparts: logographic, alphabetic, and syllabic. Logographic basically talks about the pictorial means of communication. Syllabic talks about the sounds present in each letter of different languages. And alphabetic talks about the different letters present in the various languages. Some of these are things that we still use today. So I'll be focusing more on logographic. Back then, logographics were basically sacred carvings present on different ancient Egyptian monuments, and they were basically carved using sharp flint stones. These logographics seemed like characters present that communicated a certain idea or one's opinion. They were first invented by civilizations present in China, Central America, and also Near East Africa. But in the modern day, logographics are basically emojis, and they are considered to be emojis because they are able to communicate an idea using a pictorial means of communication. There are other forms of logographics also present in the modern day, such as these symbols present that are used in maps that communicate an idea across, or these Chinese characters that are used to communicate from one another. So before I move on to something personal, I would like to talk about the most commonly used emojis. Judging by my usage, and most of you in the crowd as well, I would notice that the laughing emoji is the most common emoji used with an astonishing 9.9%. This emoji has been overused and everybody uses it nowadays, regardless of whether they are laughing or sharing the same expression. Compared to all the other emojis, 9.9% creates a large impact in the crowd. And as well, the laughing emoji is something that is popularized by every teenager. So laughing emoji is just one out of the 20,000 emojis we have present today. And these 20,000 emojis facilitate face-to-face interaction and are able to communicate the tone of the message. They're able to interact from one person to another, and regardless of where they are. We seem to live in this borderless world wherein emojis, text messages are able to be essential parts of virtual communication, and they are able to communicate an idea across. Imagine 1 out of 20,000 emojis. 20,000 emojis we have with access to our tab. These emojis are basically used to communicate an idea across, but back then, hieroglyphics or basically logographics had only 900 different characters present. And these 900 different characters were only carved on stones that took about half an hour to make. But now, within seconds, we're able to communicate the exact emotion we would like. So just to put 20,000 emojis into perspective, there was this artist named Young Jake who basically makes art using emojis about our famous celebrities such as Selena Gomez, Travis Scott, and Camila Cabello. And these emojis are basically in different colors, shapes, sizes, and forms that are used to create different physical characteristics of these famous celebrities. As you see, these famous celebrities are pretty intricate, and these drawings using emojis are so intricate. We see that emojis do have different applications other than just forms of communication. However, I'd like to bring on a personal anecdote of mine when I faced in Taipei when I noticed that my family and I had a language barrier with the local citizens. Figuring out directions to the metro was something extremely difficult, and finding out how to get there by asking the local citizens was almost impossible. Google Translate was an option, but it did have certain inaccuracies that made our communication even harder. That's when an idea struck upon me. Why not use emojis to frame a question or frame a sentence and ask them about the directions, so that they can reply by using different types of direction emojis present? After a good 10 minutes of searching through all the emojis, I found the exact metro emoji, the emoji that asked them the question, and I figured out how to order and structure those emojis so that I was able to frame the question. That's when my family and I figured out that emojis was something that can be used to communicate this without any text as well. Unfortunately, the local citizens there were able to understand what we were trying to ask them. They replied with the 4 direction emojis in all 4 directions, and we were able to reach the metro as efficiently as possible. So that's when I came up with this idea about using emojis rather than text, words, or sentences to communicate an idea across. If you see, emojis not only have that application, but they can be used to give feedback as well. This is a picture I found in the Singapore Changi airport, and I feel that is one of the key reasons why Singapore has the world's #1 airport. It basically gains feedback from tourists by just using these 6 emojis. These 6 emoticons basically are able to allow tourists to give their opinion of how their experience was in the toilet, and the airport officials can improve. You can see that these 6 emojis are present in all washrooms across Changi Airport, and basically the tourists are able to portray their emotion by using and give feedback by using just these 6 emojis. But now I would like to call upon our volunteers up on stage. Are there anybody who wants to volunteer? Yes, you guys can come up. Creating sentences using these emojis might be difficult. However, it is still possible, and that's what I'm trying to do today. I'd like our volunteers to guess these emojis or decipher the sentence behind these emojis. Okay, so volunteer A, so the first volunteer actually guessed, where are my medicines? And the second volunteer guessed, I am sick. These are not wrong, they're actually pretty close to the correct answer. If you see that these emojis are easily decipherable. But now I'd like to make this more complicated. How about we use and club in more emojis to convey a certain sentence? What are your answers now?
I wish to travel to the United States.
Okay, so the first volunteer answered, I wish to travel to the United States.
I'm traveling to the United States to meet my friend.
That's also a fairly good answer. The second volunteer answered, I wish to travel to the United States to meet my friend. You see, these answers are not exactly wrong, but it gets more complicated as more emojis are added to the sentence. The actual answer is basically that, take me to the American embassy so I can replace my lost passport. But this is very difficult to communicate through the use of just emojis. So that's why emojis do have certain limitations and cannot be used in all day-to-day conversations. However, they have more positives than negatives. But since we are going through this speech about emojis and hieroglyphics and how emojis can be used, I would like to move on to something that talks about the negatives of emojis. Thank you so much for volunteering. The negatives of emojis basically talk about how emojis are unable to convey the right meaning to some people, because some people interpret different emojis as different things. These are some sample sentences I found out about emojis. However, these sample sentences may not always convey the right idea. I snapped out certain text messages I found out from the internet, and these internet messages are actually humorous and amusing to see how different people interpret different emojis. You see in the first snap message, you see that this laughing emoji is actually used as a crying emoji, something that I would have never thought of if I hadn't seen these snap pictures. The laughing emoji has always been used as a laughing emoji, and as previously mentioned, 9.9% of all emojis used are the laughing emoji. So how could someone mess this up? You see that emojis are basically how people interpret them. They might be used in different contexts differently. Another example I found out was the cake emoji, and how the cake emoji was replaced and thought of as pimples on the face. You might find this disgusting, but someone actually used these emojis to convey that idea. Most of us here basically interpret emojis on what's the larger public would think of them. For example, if the laughing emoji is thought as a laughing emoji, everybody would think of them and use them in the context of laughing. However, some people do think of them as a crying emoji and use them in that context. Apart from that, I thought, why not build our future on basically just using emojis without any text? So emojis without any text would be fairly complicated to communicate. However, it would be effective. And I personally think that these emojis might just be our future. So this is some snapshots I found out about people just communicating using emojis without any text. You see, it is not that hard to communicate something with emojis as long as it remains simple. I did mention certain limitations it has, but it's not always this difficult. Emojis do have certain positives that outweigh the negatives by a lot, and I personally think that they might just be our future. So why not implement them from starting today? Thank you so much for listening to me.